I want to thank our friends, common friends with AICPA and SEMA. It was one of your colleagues, Phyllis Carter, who tuned into a continuing education program we did with AICPA to educate accountants on carbon accounting. That's how I came to be with you here today. I have been in the field for quite a while, and I'll give you a little bit of that background so that you have some context. But then feel free to ask me whatever you want to ask about carbon accounting and how it might play into what you do on a daily basis. The intros that you've given in the chat function are helpful. From the looks of it, a number of you are probably bumping into these things, and hopefully I can parlay some insights that will help you with your own activities. I'm going to leave this presentation like this. Are you able to see it at this point, Joyce and Don?
Yes.
Okay. So agenda, we're going to mix some things up a little bit. I wanted to find out a little bit about what you all felt the purpose of today was. If you want to chime in on the chat, or if you want to come off mute and say, I was really looking forward to this because of this, that would be great. It would help kind of guide where my comments go. The third bullet point is about association connections. The AICPA is a group I've been working with for literally 15 years on the sustainability agenda, if you will. The accountants have always been a big part of the conversation around sustainability, and the Big Four played a big role in helping set up the Global Reporting Initiative in North America. That's when I got to know the Big Four really well, got to know AICPA and other organizations like IFAC, International Federation of Accountants, etc. The Big Four and others all still have a dog in this fight, and there is quite a lot of activity going on amongst the Big Four for you all to monitor, pay attention to. It's kind of right up your alley as financial executives to see what's going on. The important thing to think about is, there have been a lot of shifts over the last couple of months and over the last year because of the economic marketplace globally, the tariffs that are going on, the regulatory developments and the slowdown of regulatory developments in this country and also overseas. And so there's a lot of noise out there, and I want to help you get through that noise and get right to the source of some really useful guidance for you all to use and pay attention to. And that's what today will be about. As Don mentioned, 30 years ago, I got started in this field, and it was due to bankers saying to me, as Mike Wallace, an environmental consultant, before we lend money on this deal, a company was buying another company, we want you as the independent third party to go inspect this company and look for any environmental, health, and safety liabilities that we might be subject to from a liability point of view, or the company itself might be subject to. We, as the banker or the financier, want to make sure this is a solid deal. We don't want any sudden, unexpected business interruptions. Fast forward to today, that same mindset is going on at the top of the food chain. The stock exchanges themselves, I've talked to recently, both are very involved in looking at listed companies and future IPOs and how resilient they are. They might be using different language these days, but it all comes down to business interruption, continuity, resilience, etc. The stock exchanges are doing this with some of their own modeling tools. They've bought a number of sustainability-related resources over the past few years and ramped up those types of activities. Underneath the stock exchanges, in my mind, sit the major rating agencies. Standard & Poor's still at the top of that food chain with a group called Sustainability One, doing very deep analysis of global disclosures on sustainability, primarily in publicly traded companies, but they do have some information on private companies, of course, and they do the credit rating. So does Moody's and Fitch and a host of others that are out there. Underneath of those well-known mainstream rating agencies, there are a variety of other ratings and analysis companies that are passing judgment on companies, giving them an up and down for their sustainability performance or their ESG performance or a variety of other metrics. And I'll show you some examples of what that looks like. And I want to bring this to your attention today because right now there's a fluctuation in the market that gives you all and FANG's membership, 30,000 members is a large group of people. It's time to chime in on some of these standards and regulations that are evolving right before us. And now is the time to be paying attention to these public comment periods and maybe as a group come together and organize yourselves to make comment. So I'm going to move into the governance piece of this. Where does a footprint live within an organization? Where is it managed? Is there any standard for carbon footprinting? Does everyone have a footprint? Yes. If you have four walls and employees or your own household, you have a footprint. Depending on where you buy your energy, you can probably get a sense of your own carbon footprint right from your utility bill. If it's not there in print when you get it, you could certainly get it through the utility company in most places in this country at this point. Every kilowatt's a little different, and that equates to your CO2 footprint. We're going to break down the scopes just quickly so that you can get a sense of where this lives, but I'm not going to go to great depth there. And then, are we required? Well, there's a really interesting story that I'm going to share with you about how this is being required. I tell this story also because of years worth of work with professional associations. I've worked with the National Association of Corporate Directors, which is the club you join if you want to be on a board of directors. I would look it up if you want to be on a board. It's the place to be. NACD has been talking about sustainability for more than 15 years. I happened to meet them when I was working for the Global Reporting Initiative, and many of their members were doing GRI sustainability reports. NACD at the time wasn't fully aware of how many of their members were doing this report and using this standard that had originated in Boston but was now based in Amsterdam. Similarly, I've worked with the Society for Corporate Governance Professionals. I mentioned before AICPA, IFAC, IMA, GARP, Global Association of Risk Professionals, NERI, National Investor Relations Institute, and others. Why do we do that? Because part of my job is educating and educating as quickly as I can so that we can democratize the concept of carbon accounting. Now, I serve as an advisor to Persefoni at this point. I'm no longer the Chief Decarbonization Officer. I joined Persefoni in 2021 after a series of conversations with chief sustainability officers who were in essence in a bit of a panic because their CEOs, their chief executives, had said on stage that they were going to be carbon neutral at some point in the future, or they were going to have a zero footprint. These are great things to say in public, but when you're one putting the numbers together and potentially getting this information audited by a third party, you might get a little nervous about some of these statements that are coming off of stages from the CEO's mouth. That led me as a partner at ERM to start talking to a range of people around our company, partners as well as nonprofits. And it made me think about joining a tech firm. That was Persefoni AI, and that was in 2021. Over the course of that time with Persefoni, my job has been to focus on education and helping people understand how this all works. And in doing that, the elevation of this issue or these issues has certainly percolated right to the board level. As I mentioned, NACD has been at this for 15 years. Boards have been talking about business interruption and these types of issues. But when you look at this org chart, carbon accounting and sustainability touches every department. And for our purposes today, the financial officers and financial professionals, you are the ones looking at the accounting piece of this. How much are we spending? How much is returning? And so when you think about sales and marketing and growth and revenue generation, all that has to do with customers. And I'm going to tell you an interesting story about customers' expectations of their suppliers. And that's where the rubber really meets the road. Same token, a lot of companies want to be seen as the best place to work. So human resources has a spot in this place. There are young people getting out of college that want to work for responsible companies. Recruitment is going on in this way where students and graduates are asking and seeking to work for responsible companies. There is also a human capital component to this. As things evolve in our field of sustainability, there's a new emergence of the discussion around human capital management. And what does that mean? We'll get into a little bit of that in a second. But pretty much every portion of your company, every portion of your client's company can have an involvement in carbon accounting or sustainability. It's really a matter of breaking down some of the silos and talking to people up and down the hallways, which is not as common since we're mostly working from home these days, but understanding that investor relations is trying to sell shares of your stock. Investor relations is probably getting questions from European investors about sustainability and about carbon footprinting. Marketing and sales are probably trying to sell to customers who have a demand for carbon information. And we'll get into that in a second. So with this being said, quickly looking at the visual that comes from the greenhouse gas protocol. This is the standard that you all should be aware of. It's referred to by most of the other regulations and standards out there in the world. So when someone says, is it done according to the greenhouse gas protocol? That's a little clue that it is a standard that's recognized. Standard has been around for more than 25 years. There are other standards that we'll touch on. But as you see this cycle of information here, scope one are the things that you and I can control. So again, think of your own household. You've decided to buy the house. You've decided to turn things on and off. You decide to drive your car. All those are equivalent to scope one. You own those things and you have the choice. Scope two is the energy you buy to operate. I live in Southern California, Edison's territory. I buy their kilowatts. I buy natural gas, right, to operate my house. Same thing with companies. So that's your scope two. Scope three is pretty much everything else. And so that's again why it comes back to finance. The things that you spend money on are traceable because you're doing it in bookkeeping protocols and accounting for it. And everything you spend money on has its own footprint. And that's where the rubber really meets the road in this discussion today. So let's take a look at something that's a complex institution, but not so complex that they can't figure out their own footprint. Now, I focus on healthcare because I've done some work with Kaiser Permanente over the years and a number of other large healthcare institutions in this country. They're very attentive to how they treat their citizens and their communities because they are healthcare institutions. Some of them are faith-based institutions, so there's an added dynamic to how they think about taking care of people and their communities. The healthcare institutions of our country have gotten together under a few different groups, are comparing their own footprints amongst themselves, and they're debating whether or not they're all doing it accurately or not. This is an example of a breakdown. It's a 2022 breakdown of Advent Health's footprint. And you can see how they've partitioned off scope 1, 2, and 3. And you can see that the majority of their footprint is in scope 3. Now, you think about what a hospital buys. I just did a webinar with UCLA and their medical operations there. The person who oversees the medical operations for the University of California said in this webinar, there are over 25,000 products in a hospital. And think about when you go into a hospital, what you see. Everything from the ambulances that sometimes might be owned by the hospital, to the food that you buy in the cafeteria, to the medical equipment that comes into the room to take care of your loved one or yourself. Then you think about the people that are working there, how they are managed and their own health and safety, the human capital component. And you think about all the things that are needed to operate a hospital, not just an operating room, but everything. So it feels like a complex institution. Every sector has a different footprint and every company has a different footprint. But this is an example of how this one is broken down. Now, from a financial mindset, we want to look at the most material issues, right? So I would say the most material ones are those in scope 3, the light green and the dark green. So that same process was taken on by our own federal government. It actually started happening about a decade ago during the Obama administration when we were looking at our own supply chain as a nation. Someone who works in this field, who pays taxes in California and in this country, I was very interested to see where our money went and whether or not the suppliers to our own nation were resilient. Are they good suppliers? Are they thinking about not only the cost of goods and services, are they thinking about the quality? Are they thinking about delivery time? And by the way, are they thinking about their own carbon footprint and their climate risk? I would like to make sure that there's no interruption to the supply chain of my company or to the US government. So the US government put this out earlier in 2025, and it breaks down the scope 3 of our nation. They also went a little further, and there's a complete list of all the 200 top suppliers to the federal government with the amount of money we spend per year and whether or not those suppliers are doing anything about climate change or carbon emissions analysis. Why would you want to do that? If I just showed you from the hospital example, scope 3 is the biggest part of their footprint. Most of that's coming from category 1, which is your purchased goods and services. In the hospital case, another large portion was coming from category 15, financed emissions, where they invest their own money. So in the federal government's point of view, this was a great way of showing publicly the scorecard of our nation's supply chain. That type of thinking is catching on around the world. And not too long after that, we saw an RFP come out from the National Health Service of the United Kingdom. The UK's NHS is a very large national-based health services provider. They have hospitals across the country, and, they too have made a commitment at the national level to look at these issues. In doing so, they realized, like that health hospital I showed you earlier, that a big portion of their footprint comes from their suppliers. So imagine you, all of us are business people, imagine you receive an RFP, a request for proposals for services from your biggest customer. And now in that RFP this year is this little table. It says, please fill in your scope 1, 2, and 3. Let me know what method you use to get scope 1, 2, and 3 calculations. And let me know if you've had any of this information assured by a third party. This is an example of the document that was shared back in 2021, 2022. We do know that the NHS has been collecting more and more of this data from its own institutions where they own and operate, but also from their suppliers. Similar to what I showed you, the US not-for-profit healthcare systems are doing a similar thing. They're looking at their own supply chain, and I'll show you evidence of that in a second. Now, those of you that are finance professionals and work in a company, you might have access to Bloomberg. If you have access to Bloomberg, Bloomberg's a place to go to get some data. So I went to a friend at Bloomberg. I worked with them for many years on these particular issues, and they have an entire area of the Bloomberg terminal that's dedicated to sustainability information. Imagine literally 10,000 companies listed that you can look up. And I asked my friend at Bloomberg, can you look up the medical equipment manufacturers and just put them in an alphabetical order for me and show me how you put them into your industry groups? Everybody puts companies into their own kind of mind blocks of companies, sectors, industries, subsectors. So this is a high-level shot of companies you and I would know that are selling into healthcare systems, right? So the NHS, for instance, puts the RFP out, and I want to see whether or not I, as a competitor, have a leg to stand on when I go in for this bid. So I might go down to my own finance team and ask them, can I use the Bloomberg terminal? We need to put an RFP in place and respond to this proposal with a proposal, and it's asking us for carbon-related information. I want to see if my competitors have any of this information themselves. Lo and behold, this is captured in the Bloomberg terminal. Now I can see in great detail, if I'm an investor working at a large investment firm in New York or in Paris or in London, I have a Bloomberg terminal. I can go see this sector of the economy, see if there's any disclosure. Now, the other thing to know about the Bloomberg information is it's only taken from publicly available sources. So if I see a number there and I feel it's questionable, I would click on that number and it will take me to the source document. Where did that number come from? That's the beauty of transparency, and that's the power of this level of disclosure in today's day and age. Now, whether you agree with these things or not, what's going on with regulation, what's going on with climate change debate, does not matter to me at all. What does matter to me is transparency and disclosure. And if I'm the buyer, if I'm the NHS, and I want my suppliers to keep coming to me and providing me with goods and services, and I want them to be my trusted business partners, this is the type and level of data I can get to now. You can also see there scope 1, 2, and 3. You can see whether or not they've had an emissions type. Did they report it or was it estimated? You can see in some cases if they've had an SBTI, which is a science-based target initiative, have they signed on to that or not? And you can see a column there that's not very full of third-party assurance. And in each of those cases, you can click on that link and find the actual document where they're explaining it. Now, you financial professionals would understand that assurance letter or verification or attestation can all be written very differently. And there's a proposal that goes into that process. How much of this information do I really want to look at? And how much of this information do I need to look at? Do I have the budget and the time window to do it? But that's where this is going. And the regulations that are evolving in this country, in California, as well as at other state levels, is asking for scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 3 then triggers each institution to look at its own suppliers, its own scope 3, and that triggers then the request for verification of some sort. There's a lot of greenwashing that's happening, And people want to know that the information that they're receiving is actual and provable. So that's what we're starting to see. So in the way of information for you all to take with you, I'm going to give this PowerPoint to the team here and they can distribute it. Everything's got hyperlinks in it. But in the way of information like this, the supply chain ripple is probably the most important thing for you to be thinking about. You all, if you work in a corporation, you have inside corporate counsel, you have outside corporate counsel. Those lawyers are heavily involved in interpreting these regulations nationally, at the state level, and internationally. That's a team you definitely want to be relying on in this day and age to make informed decisions about what you do with this type of information. The other thing to be thinking about is how is this going to play out, especially amongst your largest customers? They are asking these questions, and that's not going to stop. It might be slowing down a little bit here in the US, but as these California rules come online in 2026, that's going to create another big ripple effect through entire global supply chains. And so we want to be thinking about that as we move forward. Now, over the course of 2025, I've been doing a series of webinars with UCLA to unpack this story. So there's a couple of webinars you might want to see there. We're getting ready to do one on construction and real estate, kind of in line with what UCLA's focuses are in the business school, but also because of the massive rebuild that's happening in California. If the state is committed to these issues of climate change and carbon emissions, how is the state going to reinforce resilient construction? And how is construction's footprint impacting our state's own supply chain? So in light of that, we ended up doing a webinar with the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council to tie into this. This is a group you all might want to look up and look up the members that are involved here because many of your customers might very well be part of this association. Just like you're a member of FANG, these groups of institutions, universities, corporations, states, and even the federal government are members of SPLC because they want to spend time together and learn how to procure sustainably, right? And so there's an entire collection of people that have been thinking about this for 15 years or more. They're in this membership body that you might want to look at. As this study was going on, or as this work was going on with UCLA, we contacted a friend at Governance and Accountability Institute and asked them if we could do a little bit of a research project on the supply chain of the state of California. So similar to the model you saw the US government do in the slides earlier, we now have a report that shows the breakdown of California's spend. California being the fourth largest economy buys a lot of things. If you sell to the state of California, you might want to be thinking about what's going on with the state and its own procurement policies. The state procures mostly through the Department of General Services, but other departments and agencies across the state have the ability to procure on their own. This is all being centralized up in Sacramento, and there is a view and an interest in carbon accounting and carbon footprinting from the governor's office. That is rolling down into supply chains as well. So pay attention to these things because it will hit either you directly if you're in a RFP process, or it might be hitting some of your customers themselves. So I'm going to pause there for a second, see if anybody wants to come off of mute, ask any questions before I go into some more of the information about resources. Don or Joyce or anybody? Can't all be that shy. Did you already know all this?
Hardly, I would guess.
You what?
Hardly, I would guess.
Anything from what I've just shared that you want to go deeper into? Otherwise, I'll just move forward with some resources. All right, then. So on the regulatory front, as I mentioned, there's lots going on right now, a lot of interpretation. There's endless number of newsletters that I get myself from some of the country's biggest law firms. Endless supply of opinions on what's going on with climate and carbon related regulation. You definitely want to get involved with your outside counsel and know who they are and know what they're and how they're interpreting these things. So I'm speaking to the perspective of a large publicly traded company where I've dealt with boards of directors, and this is the type of thing I would say to the board. Your general counsels internally should be managing the outside counsel, and the general counsel internally will be thinking about disclosure and whether or not to prepare immediately or wait and see, right? And we've seen this kind of behavior before. I've worked in this field for a long time, and I've watched legal teams decide, well, let's just wait a little bit longer. Let's wait and see. Let's wait. That's totally fine to do. Wait until the compliance requirements come into play. And for the US, we don't have to worry about it at a national level, but at the California level, you do want to start paying attention. And so coming up on the 21st of August is the next public session from the California Air Resources Board. There is a previously recorded session on the 29th that you can access at these links that I'll share with you. But if not you yourself, I would definitely send or suggest that your legal team tune into this and you get a report back on what they heard and what your company is going to do in preparation for 2026 and beyond. Now, be aware that, like Feng, lawyers hang out together, and the Association for Corporate Counsels and the Society for Corporate Governance Professionals both have been looking at climate change and carbon-related disclosure as an issue, and you can find resources there. Some of your friends who are lawyers may very well be members of these clubs. This might be a way for you to strike up a conversation with them about what they're seeing across their own associations. Like you're a member of this group, they're a member of their own group. Part of the work that I've been doing in this field has been educating members of the society and providing them with specific training to give them continuing education credits. That 1 hour of continuing education credit that they can use to keep their credential. That's playing out in other professional associations too, and I'll get a little bit more into that in a second. You also have to realize that every industry has its own association too. And so I put a couple here examples. Electric Power Research Institute, we all buy kilowatts, right? No kilowatts created equally. The Electric Power Research Institute and all the major utilities in this country have come together. It's in essence a think tank here in California, but covers international issues. If you want to understand what's going on in the energy sector, the Electric Power Research Institute is a great resource. Reinsurance Association of America. Now, for finance professionals, it's interesting to understand the footprint that I showed you earlier of that healthcare system. A large portion of their footprint was in financed emissions. Why? Because they invest a lot of money into the marketplace. They invest money at their 401ks, but they're also investing it to fund the hospital and produce projects, right? And pay for projects. So when they invest in shares of stock, that becomes part of their footprint too. So the Reinsurance Association of America is not only looking at physical risk and the risk absorbed by the traditional insurers, but the Reinsurance Association of America is a club of insurers and reinsurers that are thinking about their own footprint. It's worth paying attention to this sector, especially as finance professionals, because this is some mathematical work that's still evolving. And this is another place you all might want to get involved in going forward. And then I would say, if you want to tune into any experts out there, Christina Wyatt formerly worked at the SEC and helped write the climate rule. So she's very close to these issues, and she works for Persefoni as the Chief Sustainability Officer. Follow her on LinkedIn, watch for her articles, watch for her webinars. Incredibly insightful knowledge of this space, and it's her job to keep the tabs on it. Catherine Atkin would be counterpart. You can find webinars with Catherine and with Christina, both talking about these issues, especially California, because Catherine's focused on the California developments. And then Donato Calace is a good old friend from Data Moran. He would be my go-to for European and international related understanding of regulations. He keeps his finger on the tabs very closely, is very involved in this, and gives great analysis of what's happening in the marketplace. Data Moran might be also another tool for you to use and to access if you're looking for other resources. So again, these links will be given to you. The main point of all of this is that this is a dynamic market. The way that our laws have evolved over time is similar to the way that standards evolve. There are groups of people that come together and say, you know, we should tackle this particular issue. Something's going on in the world and we need to think about how to solve this. And we need to agree on a standard approach. Should we use a meter as our measure of unit, or should we use a yardstick as our measure of unit? That kind of debate goes on. And as finance professionals, you also determine which currency are we going to use and on which date are we going to account for this currency exchange. So these types of standards are things that we rely on all the time. Just know that there's an entire ecosystem of expertise out there that have come together to look at these broader sustainability issues. In a very thoughtful way, technical advisory groups are brought in, experts are brought in, a variety of stakeholders are brought in, and there's a point and an effort to get as a large multi-stakeholder group as possible together so that all those opinions can be digested. We saw the exact same thing happen with the SEC's climate rule. Over 15,000 comments went into the SEC saying this is great to this is awful. Same things going on in California with the California Air Resources Board. They're asking for your inputs. And on a global level of sustainability, the broader spectrum, you want to definitely be paying attention to the International Sustainability Standards Board and the Global Reporting Initiative. I used to work at the Global Reporting Initiative. I think highly of their work. I see them almost as the canary in the coal mine for gathering up the latest issues. It's a broader look at the world through the multi-stakeholder view, and it brings in things that you and I might not be thinking about as being relevant to our business today, but maybe in 5 years they will be. Things that have come up over the course of our own, last 10 years together in this world, things like COVID, like massive forest fires up and down the West Coast, the Suez Canal blockage, suddenly a business interruption none of us expected. Now the return from COVID to the workplace. How does that affect people, mental well-being, human capital management? And then the latest is AI. How is that going to affect jobs, productivity, mental well-being, human capital management, et cetera? So the bottom two, the sustainability initiatives, help you keep track of what's going on out there. Now, within this space, the ISSB is going to be updating and reviewing the SASB standards. This is the moment in time for FANG and FANG members to organize themselves and get together, I would suggest, as a group. And imagine that opening paragraph as you write a comment letter. We are a membership body of 30,000 representatives from around the world. We sit in this particular professional role in our organizations, and we think what the standards are saying as of today are X, Y, and Z. That's how associations like this can work with associations like SASB and the ISSB. The links that are there will take you to the resource documents. There's a public comment survey process. It's all very straightforward. Now, you all can do this on your own and look at it, but I do recommend that FANG take the initiative to organize itself and get a collective group together, because myself, Mike Wallace, writing into ISSB saying, I, Mike Wallace, think this, is not as powerful as me writing a letter with 30,000 people, right? So think about that as you guys evolve your own work in this space and as you think about what's next on your own agendas. Now, from a governance point of view, these are some documents and reports that I did during my time with Persefoni with some of the associations I mentioned. Now, what they will help you do in a quick 20-page document, you will quickly see what investor relations officers are thinking about. We surveyed the investor relations officers. You're going to quickly see what the corporate directors and officers, the board, is thinking about these issues. You'll quickly see what other financial executives with Financial Executives International, we did 3 different reports surveying their membership. So this gives you the talking points to then go talk to that different department. This is where you're breaking down those silos. You're being able to go into the investor relations officer, the general counsel, the Society for Corporate Governance report shows similar things. It allows you to think about the fact that these topics are being discussed and being published within these other professional groups. And now you have a reason to talk about what you two should do together as you determine how to disclose and measure and manage and report this type of information. Now, the final thing for carbon accounting, and that's what we're here for today, Again, AICPA is how we met, and it was because one of your members was there taking a class to get some continuing education credit. AICPA is still doing this kind of work. Amy Beers is my main point of contact. I will give you some resources to connect with her. Any of the names of the organizations I've given you, feel free to reach out to them and contact them, follow them, pay attention to them. They are shaping the world, and you can help shape that world too. When it comes to resources, Persephone's founders always wanted to create some free aspects to this to truly democratize carbon accounting. So the Persephone Academy, you can go there and start taking classes this afternoon if you want to. You can get a credential from Persephone Academy for the courses you've completed. And if you look on LinkedIn, you'll see some recent comments about the courses that have been taken and how people are learning about carbon accounting. Persephone Pro was always a vision of the founders to provide a free version of software. We've all experienced it ourselves. I have a free version of Chat GPT. You all probably have free versions of things. We play with the free version for a while. We realize, you know what? My company is much bigger than this. I need the more advanced version, or I want the non-commercial version of this app. That's exactly what goes on in software. So the free version is there to be used by you, but more importantly, and more significantly, it's being used by large private equity firms to get portfolio companies to use the same standard measuring tool, the pro version, but it's also being used by large institutions like the NHS and sending out the free version to a bunch of suppliers and saying, look, I'm doing this. I'm using this standard and this approach. I want to give you this free tool so that I know that all of you are using the same standard approach in measuring units. And it's free and it's going to teach you how to do carbon accounting. And so that's kind of the angle to this free version of software that's now being perpetuated across the world. We now have at Persephone, there are over 7,000 registered users of the Academy and over 7,000 registered users of Pro. So it's spreading. More and more capability of carbon accounting is out there. I think the best thing to be thinking about with this is that you might feel like you've learned a lot today and you're not sure how to start, but always remember everybody is someone's scope 3. That means you are someone else's scope 3. So someone's going to come to you and say, hey, I need to know what your scope 1 and 2 is because I need to figure out my scope 3. Same thing goes for you when you start to look at your own footprint. You're going to figure it out like that hospital did, and you're going to realize, well, you know what? The biggest part of my footprint is actually coming from the things I invest in the stock market or the things I buy from my suppliers. The stock market piece, I'm going to go talk to my chief investment officer about what they're doing with our asset managers and how we manage our money. On the goods and services piece, I need to go talk to procurement. On the procurement piece, it's quite simple to start asking suppliers, and maybe your company's already doing it, but start asking your companies to measure, manage, and report, at least privately, B2B, to you on their scope 1, 2, and 3. You'll start to see the data like I showed you earlier. The federal government's doing this. The UK government's doing this. Companies are doing this. B2B action is happening. We see it in the marketplace. You could ask your friends if they're seeing RFPs that have this type of a question in it. So that's where we are with the dynamics of the marketplace. And I'm going to stop.